The Institute for the Study of Peakstates presents the first International Psychoimmunology and Psychobiology Research Symposium. Finding Gaia Communication States, presented by Dr. Daniel Zeiss.
Rightio. So for our next session, we've actually got three presenters. They're all certified therapists within the Institute. And for a long time in the Institute, Grant's view was that we didn't want to have certified therapists doing research. We only wanted research people actually doing research. So the policy was that you weren't allowed to do research unless you're actually in the research team. As our model became more and more complete, and so we're able to understand the safety issues more and more. I think it was last year, just over a year ago, I think we formalised that we now do allow our certified therapists to do some research as well, with some strict guidelines to make sure that we're still keeping safety measures and also keeping the research team informed around the sort of stuff they do. So the next couple of topics are examples of research that some of our certified therapists have actually done under those new guidelines. So let me introduce our speakers. So Inka Enyan is a staff member of the Institute and has been with the Institute since 2006. She's been training and assessing other therapists for the Institute internationally since 2013. She works as a researcher in Grant's team, is a licensed practitioner for alternative medicine by the German state, and has a background in therapeutic breathwork. Inka's passion is to support you to grow to be the best you can be. Francois Olivier is an engineer by training and has studied different self-help therapy modalities for the last 25 years. He's been studying hypnosis, transactional analysis, and provocative therapy, amongst others. He studied NLP with Richard Bandler and is a certified master practitioner. He's been certified as a trainer in process communication by Tavi Kala. He studied Peakstates therapy in 2012 with Grant and hasn't looked back since. He's translated a number of books from English to French, including the upcoming Basic Wholehearted Healing Manual and Subcellular Psychobiology by Dr. Grant Fedridge. He's currently setting up a shop as a part-time therapist and part-time musician. And then finally, Dr. Daniel Zeiss started his career as a medical doctor with a specialization in occupational medicine, medical informatics and nutrition. He's worked for 10 years in the international reinsurance and health insurance business, managed global projects and headed a department for health management. After exploring many other modalities, searching for treatments that really work for his clients, he got himself certified as a Peakstates therapist 4 years ago. He now works as a medical doctor, personal development coach, health researcher and speaker. He thrives on helping people resolving problems they may have been struggling with their whole life. So thank you, Daniel, Francois and Inka. Over to you.
Thank you, Shane. Can you see my slides? Is that online now?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. So hello and welcome. Let me take you on a journey to this wonderful planet you see on the right, our blue planet, and how we are on the quest to start communicating with Gaia. Shane just introduced the team. Here are the pictures of the team. On the left, you see Inka and Jan, and then Francois in the middle, and me on the right. Our journey will today go over a small project overview. I will let you know about our hypotheses we've came up with, what we've done so far, our results, and our observations. The project is called Gaia Communication, and first of all, we would like to share how we know that something beyond random or coincidence exists. Inka, just before she went to the Institute, had a breathwork session, and after that session, she had a feeling of being very, very tall, and she knew exactly what to do, and there was a sense of ease. She felt like running on track with no other choices necessary or required, and everything was beautiful. Unluckily, she told her class members or session members about that experience, and it vanished, which typically happens with peak experiences. Francois, as a musician, had a moment, time in the evening when he was able to listen to Gaia music. Gaia music, you can think about this as a 24/7 radio station playing, and he was able to listen to it, and it's beautiful. And for me, my special situation was when I was going for a job interview. Before the job interview, arriving at the station, I was standing at the doors opened, and I saw the city, I saw part of the city, part of the train station. And in that moment, I instantly knew this is the job I'm going to get. This is where my first child is going to be born. And this is where I spend the next years of my life. So these experiences I just described, and yesterday we heard another experience from Mark about his way to Hawaii and how he had this feeling of awe, and then he knew exactly what to do at that mile marker. We call peak experiences, and we see because there things fall into place afterwards, that this is more than random, that this is more than coincidence, and this is some greater consciousnesses leading us there, and that's what we call Gaia. So the term Gaia was coined from James Lovelock. I'm not going into details about his models and thesis here. I'm just explaining what we think Gaia is, and we think Gaia is a joint consciousness of all carbon-based life forms here on Earth. We believe that all life forms have been developed from a single cell organism. So it's basically one cell and another cell came together, they integrated, and they transcended this two-cell stage into an organism with two cells to have new experiences. Therefore, Gaia has a blueprint of our past and present development and communicates with us using the Gaia commands. Some of you might already be familiar with from the processes. The beautiful thing is with the Gaia connection, Gaia is inherently benevolent, and it's really beautiful. So why do we do the research? With a good Gaia connection, we think we have experienced the intuitive abilities to be much increased and much heightened. And it was just said before in Shane's talk that if you have these intuitive abilities, you can skip steps. You don't have to do linear research. You can just come to quicker results. It's not necessarily logical, and it's not necessarily linear and understandable by an outside person, but these intuitive steps, they make up a lot. And of course, finding the right Gaia commands allows development of new processes. So when we start some research, we define our goal, and listening to Gaia is a little bit broad. So what we did is we split it up and said, okay, our one sub goal is consciously being able to hear Gaia and Gaia commands. Then it would be really nice if we find a way to communicate bidirectionally with Gaia, so we could ask questions and receive answers. And it would be wonderful to be able to tune into Gaia FM 24/7. We'll see about that. Since we're not working with something we can touch and not something we can measure per se with the instruments we have, we formulated some endpoints, some targets we wanted to reach. First of all, talking with people claiming to have Gaia listening capabilities, we came to a special event during birth. And in that event, the specific Gaia command is very, very, very dominant. And so if we could hear that event, that command, then we would know that we're on the right track. But since there can be wishful thinking and some biases in that as well, we came up with another endpoint where when two people independently come to and go to a certain developmental event, and they listen music or they listen a command, they write it down independently of each other and pass it to the third researcher, and that third researcher then can compare the results. To the timeline, Shane already mentioned that the Institute changed the policy about applied research, and we, in January 2019, Inke and I started this first research group. Francois joined us in March. In June, we found something which we call the duality technique, and we'll go into that later. And in August, we presented our findings in the Certified Therapist meeting in Switzerland, and now we're presenting here today. So we do that usually weekly Zoom calls. There might be some interruptions due to vacation or COVID or something. So, but usually weekly Zoom calls. We're sharing our progress from the previous week. We evaluate new findings. We experiment with the findings of the colleagues, come up with new ideas, and usually there's some homework which we want to test for the meeting in the following week. Now, we formulated some hypotheses, and I will go over them here in an overview, and we will go into each one and go more into details a little bit later. The first hypothesis we had is that regular trauma doesn't permit us to communicate with Gaia. Basically, when the brains are separate and the brains are very busy fighting with each other, they don't listen so much to Gaia, and that's why we cannot hear. The second hypothesis is that there's a block in the cell membrane of the primary cell, which biochemically blocks Gaia signals. The third hypothesis is that their parasites would actually interfere with Gaia communication. The fourth hypothesis is that there's some structural problem within the DNA which blocks the Gaia communication state. And lastly, we think there could be also some trauma in the mind brain which blocks us from perceiving Gaia. Going into details in the first hypothesis, we saw and observed that, especially in Western societies, humans learn that individualism and the self is the one way to go. It's the goal, it's what we strive for. So we have different clothing, we have different ways of presenting ourselves. And so there might be an inner resistance, trauma-based resistance, to be close to other people, other living beings, and to things and even share stuff with them. So separation in Western societies is key for the living, is ingrained in the way we live. Teamwork has been coming up more and more in the last years, especially in schools, but still not usually the team is gratified for some work, but it's still the individual contribution. And then, of course, the satisfaction of one's own needs. So all these might be that we have an inner resistance to coming together, to coming to a joint consciousness, so where everybody would be part, because there could be the fear that we would have to submit to some greater good, and we don't want to be the loser in the game. Here it's important to understand that Gaia is not something with not a submission to the greater good, but just understanding doesn't mean that the resistance goes away. So that's our first hypothesis. We did some work there. We enhanced our brainwave states, and we looked for traumas which fuel the resistance or creating the need to be special, to stand out, to be the best, to find something, to have more money or something like this. And the results so far, no stable Gaia communication, no Gaia communication. We developed a technique which we call the Olivier technique. Especially François came up with the idea to find this trauma which fuel the resistance, and we enjoy our better brainwave states. Here's an example, and it's very much simplified, the Olivier technique. It's just here as an example to show you that even when you do applied research, you sometimes come up with ideas, you experiment with them, and in the applied research, we usually we want to use safe techniques we're using, like the generationals or the body association techniques. So we're not coming up with new techniques, but new ways of using them and finding trauma. And Olivier technique is an example for this, where we find, for example, imagine somebody without the issue, we imagine ourselves with the issue, and we bring them together in a special way and heal the resistance in a special way. Just to show you that even though we are on the quest to Gaia communication, there are still some tools, some things coming up on the side which might be helpful. The second hypothesis is that in the primary cell also has a cell membrane which is equal to the crown brain, and that trauma there might block the communication with Gaia. So the idea is Gaia is on the outside, and the primary cell has the barrier, the cell membrane is the barrier. And so some receptor, some broken receptor or something doesn't let signals from the outside pass into the primary cell. So there could be trauma, there could be a structural problem. What we did is we used an still in research process, the origin process, which is still in research, and tried to find what that does. And the results were not conclusive. There was a peak experience for listening with Gaia to Gaia music, but it wasn't reproducible. So there's still some things we're looking for why it happened. Also, there's some indication that it might not be the cell membrane at all, because people having a silent listening to Gaia state, they hear Gaia from the inside, so not necessarily something from the outside. Inside, outside, it's not necessarily mapped to the cell membrane, but there's an indication that this is not that's not the best idea. But we're still researching that. Then the Gaia communication, the third hypothesis, can be blocked by parasites, and we know, and we heard in the first 2 days, humans have been infected by pathogens, and these might influence Gaia communication. We came up with 2 ideas of how that's possible. One way could be that there's actively a mute signal or distortion of the signal from Gaia so that we can't hear it. And the other way could be that we use fungal structure as a sensitive substitute, thinking that it's Gaia. So we're not looking for the real Gaia, but we misinterpret some fungal structure as Gaia. What did we do? Well, first of all, we observed our thoughts when we're talking about Gaia communication. Just observing oneself and what's happening inside of us gave some ideas. Then we poked around in stories about Gaia communication and looked what happened inside of us when what feeling came up, what ideas came up when we talked about this, and then we just followed these thoughts, basically trying to find where they originated and what was there. And doing this, there was a very interesting discovery I had personally. One morning, I woke up and I noticed very negative thoughts about my own capabilities. And well, I didn't believe these thoughts. I just traced them back inside of me and traced them back to a parasite. I healed that parasite, and boom, I was in a wonderful, blissful state with complete happiness, and the day went just easy. It was a beautiful peak experience I had unlocked there. And then I went shopping, and I went through the day, and while I was shopping, I noticed that there was some sort of strange sensations in my body brain. So I paid more attention to it, and I noticed that they could show me where to go. And so I followed them, and interestingly enough, they showed me a way to a grocery store, and where I needed to buy something, which I forgot to put on my shopping list. And I remembered when I just stopped in front of the shelf. So that was very interesting. Sadly, that state faded a little bit later. But out of that, we basically developed a duality technique. The duality technique is also something I'm not disclosing here, and it's still needs validation from the research team, so it's in the pipeline. It's a technique where one can dissolve the good and bad feeling. So there's always a feeling between good and bad, or left and right, or there are many dualities in our world. And with that technique, you can just dissolve this feeling, and then there's no difference anymore. It's quite an interesting feeling. We're not sure what it does yet, so we need some more research and validation there. Our fourth hypothesis has to do with the DNA, and derived from the idea of, if Gaia is our central consciousness, how can she communicate with each individual cell and just communicate with me and not with you, for example? And so what is the difference in us? And the difference is our DNA. And so we thought, okay, so there might be some problem with our DNA and how we communicate. And interestingly, I listened to Bruce Lipton. He was already mentioned several times now in this conference. And he said just, well, DNA is the hard-coded program. Of course, I know that as well. There's epigenetics turning DNA on and off according to the environment. That's the latest studies. And cells can live without DNA, sure, red blood cells, for example. And he has a model where he says consciousness is just a broadcast. It's just broadcasted and received by the cells. So he looked into the microscope, and then he got his sort of enlightenment. And he said, there's nothing in there. It's just some tool. The cell is just working. He doesn't know about the primary cell, I think. So we know that from our model that the consciousness is linked with the primary cell. And when you look in the microscope and you have peripheral cells, then you see that there are some receptors which might receive consciousness. That's this idea that there are receptors on the cell, like TV sets have or had antennas in the past, and they receive broadcast. In the ISPS, we think it's a broadcast from the primary cell, and that's how consciousness communicates. So we have been playing around with that idea so a little bit. It's a little bit tricky to start research there. We haven't had a good grasp on how to research that, but it's just something we are still looking into. And lastly, we have that our mind brain might be standing in the way of good Gaia communication. Again, in our Western societies, the mind brain is trained to run the show. Many people identify with the mind, and that everything runs in the mind. And so there's a belief that the person is separate because the mind is separate from each other, and it has their own head, their own skull, and so on. So basically, believing that is believing the opposite of being in oneness, and therefore it could be that the mind brain actively, passively, intentionally, unintentionally, I don't know yet, blocks perception of Gaia because it's doesn't fit in the model the mind brain believes about itself. So as you can see, today we are one step ahead from where we were yesterday, but it's still very slow. It's over a year now research. We haven't found any stable Gaia communication states, but we had interesting peak experiences on the way and some interesting observations as well, which I'm going to share with you now, just to show you and give you an idea what happens when you do this kind of research, what can happen there. One person found a spot in the body that radiated the feeling of separation. Healing that made it easy for that person to connect with plants and animals, not with human beings. We looked into that. It's just n=1, so it's not really it's not really deep. We couldn't reproduce it, and there might be other traumas to block the human being connection. So it might be that Gaia connection is not just one trauma, but there's a set of traumas which we need to go into, which doesn't make the problem easier, but it makes it more complicated to find the right set of traumas to take the right steps. We found something interesting, that there seems to be within the primary cell membrane, there seem to be some sort of proteins which look similar to proteins in the plant, like the chlorophylls, which produce energy. So we just sent some love to these, and they lit up, and they produced a nice feeling of great aliveness. And sadly, that effect faded. So it's something you can do to feel nice and good, but yeah, well, don't do it. Don't do it. We don't know what it does. And then there's this, one finding as well, that a person found the fear of being self-aware, and which seemed to be holding part of his consciousness hostage and feeling of separated. That could be a good lead, because separation and being one with Gaia, there seems to be something. It's just an observation. And now some example for intuitive insights while being in regression. One member had the feeling of had some thoughts coming, some intuitive thoughts coming into him, and so we came up with, and we wrote them down to not forget them. We're just wanting to share them with you. We don't have an idea how to interpret them and what to make out of them, but well, the message was, we are running away from what Gaia wants to show us. We fear what it is, that it is painful, instead of using it to heal. The more we run away, the more painful it gets, ultimately resulting in death. Surrendering, on the other hand, will bring eternal life. So this is one of the observations. Our next step is going to be integrating the feedback we get from this conference. So we like your ideas, we like your feedback. And then we, after 1 year of playing around, trying and error with our ideas, and being completely free without any limitations and not playing by the book, basically, we want to look at now the processes the Institute did around 2004, revive them, re-engineer them with a new technology and with a new understanding. For the future, we hope to have a simple process to enable Gaia communication for everybody. This will bring living in a state in optimum with our benevolent mother. We will be working hand in hand together then to create a better future for mankind. Life with Gaia communication, we see as a life in harmony, in peace, in cooperation with nature and the animals. And we will be able then to enjoy the true abundance of our planet and unfold the full potential of our human race. Thank you very much. Now your questions, please.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. So I've got a question from Edward Sorodo. Did you try the peak experience to peak state process?
Yes, we did, especially on the one that I experienced. I tried it very often, but so far it has come up and it has come back sometimes from time to time, but it's not stable. Anything like stable.
Then from Rika Rod, she says, why does Gaia make it so difficult for herself and the whole planet or everybody? Isn't parasites, bacteria, viruses, etc. part of Gaia and is every other cell? What's Gaia's idea of creating these obstacles?
Well, I'm not sure that it's Gaia's idea. There might be some other things that went wrong. I'm not familiar to explain everything, the whole model behind that. But from what I found and from the peak experience that I shared with you, I think you see it's more me and on the others making it difficult for us to communicate with Gaia. And I mean, there seems to be some sort of Gaia communication, we believe, unless life wouldn't be possible, but it's not a conscious one, it's a subconscious one. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's right for now. You're right. These primary cell pathogens aren't necessarily part of Gaia, so she's not creating these obstacles. Different issue. So Evan Fees asked, couldn't Gaia herself be asked by persons who have the connection how to strengthen the communication? It's a good question.
Yes, indeed, and that's a very good question, very good question. We talked about that on the first day, and Grant shared his experience, and I can't make the nice sound that Grant did, but basically when you ask Gaia and you have a Gaia connection and you still have trauma, it's like or something similar.
Yes, okay.
So you simply can't see it because your trauma is blocking the communication. But exactly what kind of trauma and how the trauma is to heal, that is what we are looking into.
Yeah, we've got Antonella Ercolani has asked, what techniques have you used to have inspirational insights? Because she's asking, are you familiar with Silver Mind or Mindscape as an example?
No, we just went with our gut feeling basically. So pure intuition. No techniques.
Okay. Ulla Kromachik has asked, can you ask Gaia to point out the right trauma to heal? So similar sort of question to the other one.
Similar sort of question. I hope I can one day. Very much so.
Okay, we might have... yes, we've got another similar question around, did you ask people who actually have the Gaia communication state, was there anything they healed? But I think in a lot of cases they kind of had it all the time, right?
Yes, and as I said, we talked to the people, and there we got some hints when we said, okay, it might be the cell membrane, and we got this from the inside, so perhaps it's not the cell membrane. So we're trying to talk to people around that. So if you know somebody, I'm very happy to talk to them, and I think the whole team will enjoy very much an interview or two. But so far that wasn't conclusive what we found.
Then we've got Dr. Mary Palacera said, can you comment on Gaia as being thought as female as opposed to gender neutral? Do you have a perspective on that?
No, I don't have a perspective. I used the female because of the A at the end, and I'm familiar with Spanish, so that's very, very Spanish way, but I'm sure that it's beyond gender.
And Julian Rue has asked, did you check the link with the heart, brain and Gaia? People hearing Gaia, if they are aware of which brain is translating Gaia or interacting with it.
Interesting. So that's one theory I didn't put in here. So perceiving Gaia commands could be that it's with the mind brain, and that there's a problem with the link between heart brain and mind brain. That's why in the first hypothesis we try to enhance the brain merge and to get rid of all these problems. That would be interesting. Perhaps you can contact me later and we can talk about these a bit offline.
Okay. And then the last question from Evan Fee says, the energy generation structures you talked about, were these in the mitochondria?
I'm not commenting on that one.
Okay.
It's just an observation.
Right, yeah. Thank you very much, Daniel, and the
Thank you,
rest of the
sir.
team that helped with that applied research project.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. For more information, please visit www.peakstates.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel.